How did you qualify for the Paris 2024 Olympics?
I won the Oceania Championships.
As simple as that.
Yeah, it was a direct qualifier.
Do you genuinely think you are the best female breaker in Australia?
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week, we are looking at what I believe is the best interview in terms of nonverbal communication that we've looked at since I started this channel. It's unbelievable how many perfect examples there are of things that I've talked about on the channel, and while going through this video, I was like, that is such a great example of that. The interview was conducted on the Australian TV show The Project, and the interviewee was Rachel Gunn, or Raygun, who rose to fame during the Olympics just this past summer when her performance in the breaking category left audiences and judges shocked and underwhelmed. This is the first public interview that she's done ever since she became a global sensation all over social media and in the news, and it is a goldmine for body language, facial expressions, and word choice. A lot to talk about. Now on the channel, I already did 2 other videos about her that got amazing feedback, and in one of them I featured a friend of mine who's a world-class breaker who's been featured in a ton of movies, and in those videos we focused more on how this could have happened, how she ended up there in the first place, and we talked about the scoring system and what her scores actually meant. But if you haven't seen those videos, don't worry about it because I'll give you the cliff notes as they relate to what she's talking about in this interview. But this is really the first time that she's been asked the hard questions and had to answer them, and we're seeing a lot, and I'm really excited to dive into this with you guys. So let's take it from the beginning.
How are you doing?
Yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride. I'm not gonna lie. I definitely have my ups and downs, my good and bad days, but it has been honestly so amazing to see the positive response to my performance. Like, I never thought that I would be able to connect with so many people in such a positive way. So that has been just so amazing. But yeah, it definitely has been tough at times.
Yeah, I can well imagine.
All right, so like I said, there is a lot to talk about in this video. Each of these clips could be a full analysis in and of itself. So I have to be selective to keep this thing concise, and I want to start by talking about the host with this clip. So his name is Waleed, and right in the beginning, we see 2 behaviors from him that very commonly come together and usually indicate something pretty specific. So this is the first question he's asking, and he's gonna go on to ask the tough questions. Like, he really leans on her at some point, but this is the first one. As he's asking the question, you'll notice that there's a bit of a head tilt like this, and this is coming and going throughout the interview, so we could classify that as part of his baseline. But you'll notice immediately after the question, we see a very tight smile. So it's not a relaxed smile like other smiles we're gonna see later in the interview. It's this very tight smile, and it's a little bit raised. At the end of her answer, when she says it's been tough at times, it cuts back to him, and he's nodding with a very similar smile, but that time we clearly see that it's even more raised than the first one. Let's talk about tension in the lips. So there is a ton of research out there that shows that not just in humans, but even in apes all over the world, tight lips is something that happens with anger. Now, it's not only with anger, it can happen in other situations as well, but it's rarely a positive thing. Unless you're like holding back excitement, it's rarely positive. It happens in moments of stress, withheld opinion, disagreement, often something that we're holding in. But sometimes it's not necessarily, I don't want to say something, but I don't know what to say. And we see it very often, especially with that nod or sometimes with a bit of a head tilt, in moments of sympathy, when we feel bad for someone. And when it's raised like that, it's called a mouth shrug, and there's a ton of research on shrugging, and we often see it in the lips, and it's often under a category called an epistemic shrug, which translates to, I don't know what to say. So we often see this in moments of sympathy. When someone's telling you about a bad day they had, you might go, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say, like, I feel for you. And it looks very similar to what we're seeing there at the end as she's talking about, you know, that there have been times where it's been rough, and he's going, I can imagine. And he comments on that negativity. Now, her answer is really interesting because right in the beginning, she says she has ups and downs, and at the end she says that there's been some rough moments. But in the middle, there's this big focus on positivity, where she says that the positive response has been amazing. Now, I've said this before in my other videos, but she's a very optimistic person and focuses quite a bit on the positive like we saw here. But there's a difference between being optimistic and trying to rewrite the narrative. A lot of people, almost everyone watching this, knows that this was not a positive reaction. And she's representing it like it was honestly amazing to see the positive reaction to my performance, kind of really trying to hide the fact that we know it was mostly a negative reaction. And the potential result that can have on a viewer is somebody might look at it and go, no, hold on a minute. We know that it was a negative reaction. What are you trying to pull here? And immediately, right off the first question, gets the guards of a viewer up.
I think the moment where I thought, okay, this is wild, this is now out of control, was when I saw the sketch on Jimmy Fallon. And it's just, wow. What was going through your mind when that happened?
Mixed emotions, I think. Like, I don't know whether to hug him or yell at him, because what a platform he ended up giving me, honestly. I haven't actually seen the sketch because I don't think I'm in a place yet to watch it, but I will watch it at some point. And, a few different people have kind of explained it to me and given me different takes on it.
Okay, so I think there was a moment in that clip where regular viewers of the channel saw an expression and you were able to call out what it is. Whether you're with people and you said out loud or only for yourself, there was a perfect moment there of contempt. And this is something we talk a lot on the channel about, and it happened the moment Waleed mentioned the sketch on Jimmy Fallon. The moment he said that, if you look at her expression, she kind of moves her head back a little like this, and we see the mouth scrunch on one side as she does this. It's perfect. It's one of those moments I was talking about earlier where we get a perfect example of something that we talk a lot about on the channel. And contempt is a universal expression. In other words, there's been research that has established that there's a bunch of emotions that are expressed the same everywhere in the world across cultures. Contempt is one of them. And it's characterized by a scrunching on one side of the face. And it's usually the lips are being raised on one side, causing a line on one side of the nose. So sometimes it looks like this, and sometimes it looks like this. So one way or the other, a bit of a scrunching. And in that moment, the second he mentioned Jimmy Fallon, we saw it as her head kicked back a little. It's exactly that. Contempt is the feeling of looking down on something or judging something. And it would make sense here that that's how she would feel towards the Jimmy Fallon sketch, because maybe she feels like it was a low blow, that they were making fun of her. But what's interesting is in her answer, in her words, there's a fluctuation of both emotion and whether she's watched it or not. It's actually rather confusing because there's these contradictions in what she's saying, even on an emotional level. Because she says, I don't know whether to hug him or to yell at him because he gave me this huge platform. But we saw the contempt on your face when it was brought up, and you're about to say that you're not in a place where you can watch it yet. So you know that it's a negative thing. So even if he gave you a giant platform, it was in a negative way. So it doesn't really make sense that you would want to hug him. She's trying to shift it towards the positive, but the positivity is the scale of it. But this is a negative thing on a big scale. So it's almost like the positivity, the big scale, just multiplies the negativity. And then we see the emotional response to it. So I'm finding it hard to believe that she would hug him for this. And then there's the whole thing of her saying she hasn't seen the sketch yet, which she commented on how she feels towards it. We saw the emotional response to it. So I guess what she means is she hasn't sat down and watched the whole sketch, but it's misrepresenting to say, I haven't seen it yet. I bet she's seen enough. She knows what it's about. And this is something she's going to do a lot throughout the interview, to where she kind of plays with words a little bit to shift the importance of things or shift where the focus goes. And this is a good example of it. She's seen enough to answer the question.
A lot of the responses, though, is also just due to people not being very familiar with breaking and the diversity of approaches in breaking. And it was so fantastic that the next day the judging chair, MG, came out and explained that, in the breaking community, what I did actually wasn't very shocking, and, awful responses.
So this is going to be really interesting because usually I talk about baseline with the first clip of an analysis. But in this case, we started a little hot, right? He started with how you been, how you holding up? And we started with the intensity, but with this answer here, she had a moment to talk a little bit more calmly about things that don't get her too worked up, right? When she was talking about the judge and the process and then, the different styles and all this stuff, she was a little more relaxed. So we're getting a good baseline here of what it looks like when she communicates without stress within the context of this interview. And there are a couple of vast differences even between answers that we saw previously and definitely answers that we're about to see. One of the differences you'll notice is that the pitch of her voice is much lower and calmer with this response than pretty much any other response in the interview. And there are some responses that are coming up that if you compare side by side, it's wild. It's almost like two different people who are talking. And across all the research that's been done on stress and deception, there's been a lot of agreement on the fact that in stress and deception, the pitch of the voice goes up. Because when we're nervous or stressed, the muscles in the neck tense up and that causes a rise in the pitch. Another place where we see the difference is blink rate, or the number of times we blink in a minute. And here we're seeing, I would say, a rather normal baseline, maybe still a little elevated, but really nothing compared to pretty much almost anywhere in the rest of the interview where she's under fire or talking about stressful things, and especially with some questions we're about to see where her blink rate is off the charts. She says something here that I want to touch on, and I've talked about a lot in the previous videos, but she says that there are different styles of breaking. There are some who are more athletic with it and then others who are more artistic, talking about herself. This is something that in my first analysis, I pointed out that she probably overemphasizes the artistry of breaking. But here's the thing, and it's becoming a lot more clear now. The Olympics is an event that celebrates athleticism. So even by what she's saying here, she's saying, some breakers are more athletic, some are artistic, but you didn't go to an art exhibit. You went to the Olympics. So we're getting here a hint in her words, in her own words, that she understands fundamentally that she didn't belong at the Olympics because her artistic self-expression style of breaking might be valid or valued in certain arenas or locations, but the Olympics is about athleticism. So when you're saying that, some dancers do that, I don't do that, you understand that this wasn't the place for your style.
How did you qualify for the Paris 2024 Olympics?
I won the Oceania Championships.
As simple as that?
Yeah, it was a direct qualifier. Yeah.
And did you know anyone who was involved in making the selection or any of the judges?
There were 9 judges, all from overseas. I don't think any of them have judged anything that I'd been in before. I was, super nervous about it, to be honest, because even though I'd won all these competitions in Australia, I was nervous about winning this one because it was all new judges.
Okay, so first of all, right in the beginning, you'll notice a lag. I'm not entirely sure if that's a behavioral lag or an internet lag because she's doing this virtually, the interview, so it's possible that he asked the question. It took her a second to hear it before she responded. So I don't want to talk about that behaviorally because it might not be an actual her kind of pausing before she answers. It kind of feels like there's a moment where she registers the question a little late and then answers. But there's still some great stuff behaviorally in the way she's answering. So she answers it in 2 parts. So first she says, I won the Oceania Championship. And then when he asks, was it really that simple? She kind of laughs, like this big laugh. And she goes, it was a direct qualifier. Like, duh, you're so silly with that question. And it almost has this kind of, it's so obvious element to it. I won fair and square.
Yeah, it was a direct qualifier. Yeah.
But what's interesting is in the first part when she answers, as she says, I won the Oceania Championship, we see 2 things. One, we see a one-sided shoulder shrug, a very clear one, because only her left shoulder shrugs as she's saying that. And elsewhere in this interview, we certainly see full-on 2-sided shoulder shrugs. So we know this isn't baseline. So shrugging when it's actually a lack of something is typically symmetrical. We're not thinking about it. It's just, I don't know, I don't care, I don't know what to do. We just shrug like this with the shoulders. But when it happens only on one side, this is called a one-sided shoulder shrug and usually denotes a lack of confidence, not necessarily a lack of knowledge. We're less sure in what we're saying and we use it as an illustrator to try to sell that. So interesting that we're seeing that one-sided shoulder shrug here. And immediately after she says that she qualified, we see a very quick lip bite. What's interesting about this is in another interview where she talked about another battle that she had and how she won it, we saw a tongue jut, which looks like this. And both a lip bite and a tongue jut very often come with a close call. And you often hear the sound with it, right? So either like this or like this, like when something was close or you got away with something or almost got away with something. Both those gestures happen often in close calls. So there's a lot of lack of confidence around this. Like with this win, she's trying to present this like, duh, I won the thing, but we're seeing in her body language that there are certain things that indicate she's not that confident about that qualifier. Then she's asked if she knew anyone who was part of the selection process or the judges, and holy moly, clusteroni. This is a great example of a behavioral cluster of stress. So typically when we want to know when something is likely deceptive or causing a lot of stress, we look for several gestures because one gesture can never allow you to know that. So we look for a lot. And there's so much going on here. First of all, she starts by answering something that was never asked. She says, there were 9 judges, all from overseas. So that suggests that she didn't know them, but doesn't directly answer the question, saying, no, I didn't know any of them. She says there were 9 judges, all from overseas, and I don't think any of them had judged any performance or any battles that she had before that. I don't think any of them had judged anything I'd done before. This is what we call a non-answer statement. It kind of feels like she's answering the question, but she's not. The question was, did you know anyone that was part of the selection process or the judges? She focuses only on the judges, not the selection process, and talks about how they're from overseas, there's 9 of them, and they haven't judged anything that she'd done before. So that's a non-answer. Then listen to her pitch, especially when she goes, I don't think any of them had judged anything that I'd done before. I was super nervous about it.
I don't think any of them have judged anything that I'd been in before. I was, super nervous about it, to be honest.
There are 2 moments where we go into that really, really high pitch, which isn't happening a lot during the interview. There are times where she emphasizes things and her volume goes up and her pitch might go a little higher, but this was really high on those notes. At the very same time, her hand comes up and starts to adjust that wire, which I suspect is the headphone that she's wearing to hear him, but all of a sudden she starts fidgeting with that. And this is very consistent with grooming, because usually what happens is when our focus internalizes, we become self-aware, we start noticing things that might be off and we start fixing these little things or fidgeting with little things. And it's a good indication that stress is spiking. We're becoming self-aware. And all the while, her blink rate is through the roof. It is so high. It's just blink, 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 constant blinking. So this is a lot. There's a lot going on. Now, there were early rumors that her husband was one of the judges, but it's been looked into. The Olympics have commented on it, and it appears that none of the judges were compromised, like secretly on her side or something like that. But it's just interesting how here he asked about the selection process and the judges, and she only talked about the judges, not the selection process. Then we have all this stuff with the pitch, the blink rate. We're suddenly becoming self-aware. We're dodging the question and not answering it in its entirety. So this is a red flag. Now, could it be that all these gestures are just randomly happening and it's purely coincidental? It's possible. Could it be that something else is stressing her out and causing this? It's possible. That's why we say that clusters raise the probability of deception, but it never means for sure deception. It just means that in an interrogation or interview, if I saw these behaviors all of a sudden, I would have a lot more questions and I want to dig deeper on this topic.
Well, one of those judges from New Zealand was speaking actually in your defense in explaining what had happened, and he said this.
All us judges talked about how she was going to get smashed, absolutely smashed.
I mean, it's fairly stark. Did you know it was going to be rough?
Yeah, I knew my chances were slim.
For this one, I'm going to focus more on what she's saying than the body language, because this is the first time she's acknowledging that she knew going in that she wasn't going to win. And that's interesting because it's one of the first clues that we're getting that she knows that her skill level isn't quite where it needs to be to compete at the Olympics. So all the things she's saying about different styles, athleticism, and all this stuff, in the back of her mind, she knew that her different style, her artistic style was not going to be enough to win at the Olympics. So there's a bit of a contradiction between this and other things that she said about her different style. But more importantly, there were times where I wondered, did she know that she wasn't going to win? So she kind of purposely took it really lightly and did some things that she knew would get headlines and attention. You're at the Olympics. If you're not going to get the headlines by winning, maybe there's this different avenue you can explore. So this is leaving the possibility that that knowledge could have kind of influenced some of these risks, to make headlines a different way. It's a possibility. I can't say for sure. And then at the end, she says, I knew I was going to be beat and I knew people wouldn't understand my style and what I was trying to do. Now that's interesting because it kind of puts it out there that people don't get me. Like people don't get what I'm trying to do. But here's the thing, at the Olympics, you're not judged by people. You're judged by 9 individuals who understand breaking, who are good enough to be judges at the Olympics. So if you are good enough at breaking and you keep saying that, there are these different things and I focus on these different things, then it shouldn't matter if people don't get it because the judges get breaking. So I'm having a hard time verbalizing this, but there's a lot of great irony to her keep insisting that her style is different, but she knew she was going to be beat. Therefore, even her different style isn't great by breaking terms because she's being judged by breaking judges.
For example, a quote from a breaker and a bit of a hip-hop legend in Australia called Spice, who says, I feel like it's just pushed our scene in Australia into the dark ages. It made a mockery of the Australian scene, and I think that's why a lot of us are hurting. In hip-hop, we have this thing. You step up or you step off. You need to know your place. Is there any merit in those criticisms?
Yeah, look, it is really sad to hear those criticisms, and I am very sorry for the backlash that the community has experienced, but I can't control how people react.
Whoa, so much going on, and it's even before she speaks. In her reactions, there's a lot. So in the beginning, he talks about what Spice said. She's a hip-hop legend from Australia, and even when he just mentions hip-hop legend Spice, we see her Rayguns on the screens in front of him, and again we see that quick flash of contempt. It's not as pronounced as the last one, but really quickly see one side of the mouth just go up. So she knows the quote, she knows what this person said about her, she knows what's coming. Then he actually shares the quote, and he says that she made a mockery of the Australian scene. And at that moment, if you look at her eyes, we notice that they shoot to the side, but more importantly, they open up wide like this as that's happening. Really quickly, just kind of open up like this. And that opening of the eyes is very consistent with surprise. Studies have shown that when we open our eyes more, we take in more information. And when we're surprised, moments of surprise, we're trying to take in as much information as we can to know how to react. So it's all over the world. It's universal that with surprise, those eyes open up and she's kind of turning away from it like, whoa. That's what that nonverbal is like, whoa, that's pretty intense. Then immediately you'll notice she kind of takes a breath and tilts her head like this. And this is the head tilt of skepticism. So head tilt often happens in comfort or sympathy, but also happens in curiosity or skepticism where you're trying to figure something out. So in minor confrontations, you might have this really type of head tilt. That's what it looks like. There's this kind of almost a bit of a sassy movement into that position as she ends up here listening to this quote, and it's like, really? This is what we're doing? And that goes well with that surprise to kind of skepticism type thing. Then he goes on with the quote to say, there's a saying in hip hop, step up or step off. And this is such a great example of nonverbal communication because in that moment, she is either trying to or thinks that she's smiling as she's listening to this quote. But if you look at her face, it actually has more signs of disgust than happiness or joy. And disgust is another universal emotion. People from all societies recognize it. And with disgust, we want to shut everything down because we want less input. Whatever it is disgusting. So we don't want to see it. We don't want to smell it. We don't want to taste it. We close everything. So we see a lot of scrunching around the nose, around the mouth. And with that smile, the way it comes up and scrunches around the nose, and we see this kind of smile, it's unpleasant. It's disgust. She doesn't want to face this quote or this conversation. Then as he finishes the quote, you need to know your place. We see a tight smile, which is a little raised, and an eyebrow flash. The eyebrows go up and down really quick. So there are a lot of reasons we see eyebrow flash socially. One of them is surprise. So again, it can be that kind of surprise, like with this whole quote, like that's a little intense. And this tight lip smile, again, withholding something, holding something back, not wanting to or not knowing what to say. It is a little raised, a little shrug-ish, but essentially holding something in with that kind of, wow, that was pretty intense. So I think this whole thing we're seeing here is surprise, unpleasant feeling towards this quote, and like, well, that's pretty intense. It's a pretty intense thing to say about my performance. Then we saw something that I was wondering if we are going to see. Because when she first did a response video to this, it was a lot of explaining and talking away. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, are we going to get an apology to the community, to the feedback or the backlash that the community that you love has received as a result of this? Because I kept thinking, if I went and represented what I love, body language or mentalism, on a global scale, and because of my performance, people were talking bad about mentalists, it would really hurt me. And I would say, I'm so sorry. And I would tell the public, like, guys, don't take it out on the community. This is on me. And I was wondering if we were going to see that, and we did here. So for me, it was nice that she takes a moment here to say, it's really awful that what the community is facing as a result of what I did. And she says, I can't control how people react, but I'm glad to see that she's aware that her actions had a repercussion on this community that she respects, and that she is talking about how it's not pleasant to see that. I'm also aware that they're playing this sad music, and that contributes to the atmosphere, but at the very least, that acknowledgement was nice to hear.
Do you genuinely think you are the best female breaker in Australia?
Well, I think my record speaks to that. I was the top-ranked Australian B-girl in 2020 and 2022 and 2023. I've been invited to represent at how many world championships, Paris, Korea, so the record is there, but anything can happen in a battle. It's always about what happens on the day. That consistency shows, my level, so.
And that's the question that we've all been waiting for someone to ask her. Do you legitimately think that you're the best? Do you think you're the best? And the answer is really interesting, because here's the thing. If somebody asks anyone out there, are you the best at what you do? Your answer either has to be quite arrogant, or it's going to sound a lot like a non-answer statement, where you kind of have to shift around being like, yeah, of course I'm the best. I'm totally the best. It's not something that most people will be likely to answer. So you have to think about what you're going to do with that. So as much as I could point to a couple of things, like for example, it takes her a second to answer. We see a shrug before she answers, both shoulders, legit shrug of, lacking something, lacking knowledge. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't really know how to answer this. And then we see the blink rate go up, and we see a kind of non-answer, because she talks more about what she's done rather than answer, does she think she's the best? So this is a good example of how, yeah, there's a bit of a cluster there, but we have to consider other options that it might be there. It's genuinely a difficult question to answer straight up. So that could be causing the kind of the stressful behaviors and the bit of a lag, and the blink rate also, which is really up. So yeah, it's because anybody asked, are you the best at what you do? You have to kind of think about how you're going to navigate that question. Ultimately, she's going to her credentials and being selective with, well, I've done this and I've done that, but we're not really getting a concrete answer as to what she thinks. What she legitimately does she think that she's the best breaker in Australia? It is dodgy, but I don't know how much information that dodginess gives us. At the very least, what I think we are getting here is her self-reassurance script. At times in this journey where she's felt, that she's not great, she shouldn't have been there, doubts herself, this is where she goes to comfort herself and go, now hold on, you've won qualifiers, you've represented Australia at other international events, other judges have sent you to these events. I think this is what she tells herself to reassure herself. Is it enough for her to actually believe that she's the best Australia's got? It's hard to tell. It's a quick answer. It's a little dodgy. The cluster is there, but I would expect it to be there with a question like this. So it's tough.
The irony of this is that you are perhaps the most famous Olympian of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games worldwide. I mean, is there an upside to all this?
The upside is you get random people contacting you that you never thought would ever notice you. And it's not just like breakers that you've respected for, a decade. It's someone like Sir Richard Branson calling you to say that he enjoyed your performance and he thought that it was plucky and courageous and fun. And, he would love to, do something with me and have me on some cruises with Boy George.
All right, this one's going to be quick, and I think it points to a side effect of her optimism, and it's the fact that she has a hard time gauging when things are actually positive and when they may not be as positive as they might seem on the surface. Because she's talking about how Richard Branson, one of the richest men on the planet, contacted her and said that her performance was plucky, courageous, and fun. So none of those adjectives are really something that speak to skill, right? It's not like he said, I thought you were really good. Ignore the noise, I thought you were actually really great. He didn't say that. He said plucky, courageous, and fun. Yeah, I think those are really adequate adjectives, and that he said that he would like for her to go perform or make an appearance on one of his cruises, perhaps with Boy George or something like that. And she's talking about it like it's this big positive thing because that's how her optimism shifts it. But, and I'm really trying not to sound mean here, I'm not saying it's this full on at all, but this almost has a bit of a sideshow vibe to it. Like come, let the people see you because everyone's talking about you. So there's a little bit of me going like, is this more of like we're gonna sell tickets to our cruise because this big joke is gonna be there? That's kind of what it sounds like to me. And again, I'm really trying not to sound mean, but when the adjectives are plucky, courageous, and fun, it kind of seems like we're not calling you because you're really talented and really good at this. It's fun, it's plucky, you know? People are gonna have a hoot with you being there.
Do you think there's any more breaking in your future?
I don't think I'll be competing for a while. Not really wanting to be in the spotlight, breaking, competing. But it's been nice. Like, it's been a bit of a process to try and start dancing again. That's actually been tough. It was my medicine and then it turned into my source of stress. So I'm really happy that it gets to go back to being my medicine. I can kind of finally feel free again. So it's, I'm looking forward to breaking, but no, I don't think I'll compete for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot we could talk about with body language. There's that one-sided shoulder shrug as she's talking about, it's been tough and now it's been, again, one-sided shoulder shrug, usually a lack of confidence in what we're saying. So there's that. But I want to focus on, again, what she's saying here, because this is the first sign I've seen since it happened and in this whole interview where she's acknowledging that it might be time to call it quits on the competing. So a glimmer of her understanding that competing and breaking isn't necessarily for her. And she's not presenting it that way. She's not saying like, I realized with this whole experience that my skill isn't quite where it needs to be. She keeps redirecting to the positive. She keeps shifting the focus. She keeps trying to make it about the artistry. But this is the first time that we're getting a sign where she's going, I think I won't be competing for a while. So that's the result. And with it comes a certain acknowledgement, I think, of her understanding that it's not her place, that the skill isn't quite there. Because if it was and the Olympics went really well, she would come out of it and she would continue to compete. So what I'm basically trying to say is this is for me the first sign that the feedback actually has gone through to her for her to go, oh, okay, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm not that great at this. And I think that's a great place to leave this. Look, I'm really not for public bullying and mockery and condescension, but when you agree to go to a public competition, the biggest in the world, where athletes compete every 4 years, you're accepting to be judged, to be critiqued, to be talked about. So it's the feedback is normal. People talk about what happens at the Olympics. So I don't think that was necessarily all bullying. She talks in the interview how there's been a lot of targeted negativity, and I think that's not necessary. But the conversation that's being had about how she didn't belong there or the skill level wasn't quite there, you accept that when you go to the Olympics. So overall, I think that part of it is fine. That she did this and the world said, no, you're not ready. And we're seeing here, even if she's trying to sugarcoat things or shift to the positive or redirect, we're seeing in her body language those negative feelings towards this. We're seeing her acknowledgement to the community. And at the end, we're seeing her acknowledgement that maybe competing isn't for her. So something got through. What do I think she thinks of her skill level? I believe that in her performance, in her response to it, and in this interview, we have seen signs of delusions of grandeur, not as a diagnosis, as a behavior. I believe that behaviorally, she could focus on positives, ignore weaknesses, and in her head, she believes herself to be more skillful, more talented, and as someone who brings more value to the art than she actually does. But I think that we're seeing right here at the end signs that with the commentary out there, it is being chipped away at. and that she's seeing that, okay, she's not ready to compete. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe that the feedback and the response has actually chipped away and she's starting to realize that, okay, maybe she's not as good as she thought she was? Or do you believe that she's still sitting there convinced that she's the best and that we all have it wrong and that we don't get why what she's doing is extraordinary? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.